This is the first of a new series of lectures that we started this year. We started several new types of lectures this year. And this one is the Atlanta Practices Lectures. And the idea behind this is that each semester, we're going to bring in somebody that practices in Atlanta, either as an architect, could be an artist, could be a fabricator, but we want to start highlighting some of the people in Atlanta doing the most interesting work. And so, for the first lecture, we're very lucky to have Manuel Cadrecha here. Manuel is the design director at the Atlanta office of Perkins+Will. And has he spent your whole career there?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's been with Perkins+Will for over 30 years and has had a huge impact on the Atlanta office. Last year, I was actually at a book launch for a book that he recently did, which is a really beautiful book. And at the launch, he made a few comments about the projects in the book and what went into doing it. But one of the things that he was very adamant about at that launch was that the work in the book was not his work, that it was the work of a lot of people, of a team. And every time I read anything about Manuel or hear people talk about him, that's one of the things that always comes up, that he's, as design director, you have a big responsibility in a firm like Perkins+Will. But the only way that you can do that successfully, the way that he has, is to understand that you're really part of a much bigger team. You have to be a leader in collaboration. You have to understand what interdisciplinary work really is. And you have to have real empathy for putting teams together and have them produce projects as beautiful and as successfully as Manuel was able to do that. So that sort of stuck with me from the first time that I really got to hear him talk about his work. So I think it's a real lesson, I think, for you guys when you're thinking about how you practice and how you're successful with your practice, no matter what type of firm you're in or what size of firm you're in. Manuel was born in Havana, Cuba, grew up between New York and Madrid, and that kind of split was very formative, I think, in how he thinks about his work. I think he described it as like the old world, or old city and new city. And spending time in both of those cities at a young age had a big influence on how he thinks about architecture today, and I think the kind of passion that he has for work and the way that he approaches his design. He got his master's degree from Georgia Tech, and so we're just very happy to have you here as the first lecture of this series. So please join me in welcoming Manuel Cadrecha.
Sorry. Okay. Hello. I remember sitting out there, so it's always kind of funny to be here when I visit Georgia Tech now. My father was a very well-known engineer, and he was a person that, unlike a lot of engineers, was equally informed by his right brain, and he was a person that loved art and loved architecture, loved music, and saw engineering as part of that world, part of that creative world. And he told me when I was thinking about being an architect, he was delighted because he said that architecture was the last humanist profession. He said that it was sort of the last wall between, what are the values of civilization and chaos. He said that architects really can design cities in ways that can make people's lives more fulfilling. And that's what he thought was kind of the mission of architecture, to elevate people's experience. As Scott was saying, architecture, unlike what's typically portrayed in the media, is not it's not something that's practiced typically by one person. I think that's the way it's portrayed. But all of us that have worked in architecture for a long time know that that architecture is an art of synthesis. It's about working together with a lot of people, trying to incorporate a lot of ideas, trying to orchestrate the very complex and to try to make it something that is simple and fulfilling for people to explore and to understand. All creativity, I think, is really spurred by personal experience. I mean, often I think that when you're starting out as an architect, you're trying to find inspiration in other people's work. You know, you find yourself doing that. What did so-and-so do? What is so-and-so doing? But in art and in architecture and creativity, I really feel that you have to look within yourself to find your voice. I mean, it sounds corny, but it's really what you need to do. You need to own the work. It needs to be you that's in there. And then also understanding the particular place, everywhere that we work is an interesting place. I remember when I was at Georgia Tech, I took a course that was called Transformations, Urban Transformations with Bob Segrist. And he talked to us about finding the discrete clues in each site and finding what those were and then bringing those up and help them to inform the designs that we did. And I really believe that. It's something actually that when I was in school on the London program in the late 70s, we had a start-up architect named Rem Koolhaas who was teaching us. And he said something that has stayed with me that went with Bob's comment. He said, an architect's role is to graft fantasies on the earth, which I thought was such a marvelous thing to say, because it wasn't just about creating something, it was about sort of this violent, action of scarring the earth and creating something on it and finding something that's in it that you can pull out that is really remarkable. In order to do that, you really need to understand not only who you are, that I talked about before, but where you are and where you're working. And all those things really contribute to very unique design solutions. Understand the history of the places. But ultimately, like I said about my dad, if you don't understand that our major role is really to create those amazing places that are going to improve people's lives, then you wonder why you're in architecture in any place. I mean, any of us that go to Rome and stand inside of the Pantheon, underneath the oculus of the Pantheon, know what it's all about. You know that when you stand there, Napoleon stood there, Charlemagne stood there, and everybody felt the same sense of awe and the same sense of personal uplifting throughout the centuries that you're feeling at that time. Not that any of us are ever going to create a project as significant as the Pantheon, but you should be thinking about how the work that you do is going to really elevate people's experience. And something that architects rarely talk about, but I think is really important, is that the work that we do should be beautiful. I mean, it should be something that people look at and love. I mean, it's not about creating ugly things just to cause people, to get people's attention. I mean, you could do that, but that has a short shelf life. I think that you want to move people because it's beautiful. I started becoming interested in architecture in 1964 when my father took me to the World's Fair in New York. The whole emphasis of the World's Fair was about the future. So it was Futurama. Everything was very Jetsons-like. But then he took me to this Spanish pavilion. And in the Spanish pavilion, there was a sword. And it was this enormous sword. It was a sword that was about 6 feet tall, and it was a broadsword that belonged to El Cid, who was an actual famous knight. I mean, El Cid lived in the 1200s, and he was a person who was renowned as a warrior for the Christians while there was battles with the Moors. But he was so respected by the Moors as a warrior and as a nobleman that they gave him the name El Cid, which means my lord. And there were several times when he would have fights with his king, his Christian king, and then would go fight with the Moors against the Christians. He was a very interesting man. But thinking about this, I started really thinking about my heritage from Spain. And it started really making me very interested about exploring my own culture and my own background. And we moved to Spain. And these are the windmills that are south of Madrid in La Mancha. And these windmills, which were actually made famous by Don Quixote, by Cervantes and Don Quixote, actually now have been bought up by people in Madrid and turned into weekend vacation homes. But it's really kind of amazing. My family's from up there. And this is northern Spain. It's an area that's called Asturias. And Asturias is the opposite of what people think Spain is. When people think of Spain, they think of flamenco and bullfights and red wine and all of that. Asturias looks like this. This is Asturias. Asturias is super Celtic. It's bagpipes and people dance the jig. People drink cider. It is a completely different kind of Spain. When I was, this is the city that my family's from. It's called Gijón. It's a city that was founded by the Romans 2,000 years ago, and it was founded as an R&R place for the legions while they were conquering Gaul. So this is a place that they would send the legions, and they would go to the beach, and then they'd go back up to Gaul and continue warring. But it's a magnificent city that no one knows about. This is a bridge that when I was a kid, I was told was a Roman bridge. I later found out that it was actually from the 12th century, but there had been a bridge at this time by the Romans. But I was in love with the idea that the Romans had been in this area, and I remember fishing off this bridge with my grandfather. So all this stuff starts, you're wondering, why am I talking about this? But I'm talking about it because all this sort of contributes to who you are as a person and what you bring to the table when you're designing buildings. This is where I grew up, as Scott said. I grew up, well, not there, but I grew up in Madrid, which is very different from Asturias. It's a very, how do you say in English, señorial. It's a very sort of formal city. It's a very formal city. This is the Plaza Mayor, where actually they used to have bullfights here. But this is the main square in Madrid. And I remember as a kid going to the post office with my mother. This is the post office. And and being amazed, because I had already lived in New York, that they actually had like pens that you had to dip in ink when you were filling out your receipts and stuff in this place. That all starts sort of creating, even in a child, sort of an interesting way of looking at the world. This is actually a photograph from the 60s of the streetcars that we used to ride through Madrid. And this is during the Franco period. The only thing that was good about the Franco period was that there was no crime. So we, as kids, we were allowed to just roam around freely through the streets. And we used to get on these streetcars and ride through the city, looking at these beautiful buildings that were there and riding through these wonderful avenues and enjoying the outdoor nature of people living in the city and owning the city. Then I moved back to New York. Very different kind of environment, right? So you're going from this sort of like bucolic area to a very sort of ordered, organized, very fast-paced city that even gets reflected then in the layout of the city with the park carved into the middle of the city. And I remember going to concerts and to Joe Papp's theater in the park, which was it was a free theater, and you had to stand there all day to get your free ticket. And I started looking at all the buildings that lined the park, and I was really taken by the new world and by the image of the world that was here in Manhattan that showed you these buildings that were incredibly optimistic and forward-looking, as opposed to the buildings in Europe, which was always looking towards the past. And then here's sort of that same area in New York today with some of the buildings that are projected to come up. This is Soho in the 70s. And I had a friend whose mother was an abstract expressionist. And I would go visit my friend in Soho, and they lived in one of the real lofts before Soho became a theme park. And I remember running to the subway. You know, I would leave my friend's house at midnight and run to the subway to catch a train uptown. Well, this is Soho now. So it's like Louis Vuitton, and you know, it's a very upscale place. But the thing that's interesting is that this is the same Soho. So the values of those buildings, the organization, the quality of the street life, everything was there when it was not being used in sort of in the manner it is now, but it's still the same place. It's just, it has survived. And that's a really big theme for me, that the buildings that we design, the cities that we design, have to have an ability to transcend their current programs. That they shouldn't be so designed that they can only be used for one thing, that they have an obligation to change. So I have 3 projects that I was going to show you, and there are 3 different kinds of attitudes. One is the Haliç project in Istanbul. The other one is a project that I can't tell you where it is because it's confidential, but it's in the Middle East, and it's a health sciences university. And then the last one is a tower that we're working on here in Atlanta. The thing that's interesting about the Haliç project is that it's working in like one of the erogenous zones of the world, right? It's not only in Istanbul, but it's in the Haliç, which is the Golden Horn of Istanbul, which is a fabulous place. So it's an unbelievably rich context. And it's working at a very large scale, at a city scale, so we're working with lots of different kinds of people. The Middle East project is one where you're basically designing in a desert. So I had to change this because when we were putting it together, we originally wrote designing without a context, but the context is the desert. So it's the desert, and you have to find something within that. And then that's working in collaboration with one of my partners in the Miami office, Patricia Bosch, who's an exceptional design director. So we were working together on this project. And then the 14th Street project is designing where you live. So that's another kind of test, is that when you start designing something that you're going to see every day and everybody that you know is going to be looking at it, and that the responsibility that brings with it. And then it's working on a single building. So this is the Haliç. This is the Sea of Marmara. This is Istanbul. This is the European side of Istanbul. No, this is the European side of Istanbul. This is the Asia part of Istanbul. So when you're in Istanbul, you can stand here and see Asia. It's kind of amazing. This is what's called the historic peninsula. This is where some of the great monuments of Western civilization are located. The Blue Mosque, Hagia Sophia, and this is the Golden Horn. So the Golden Horn is where the imperial Ottoman Empire had its shipbuilding and its port, and from there they had this magnificent web of trade that went all through Europe and Asia. This is the Sea of Marmara. And we're doing several projects in Istanbul, but I'm always moved by the Sea of Marmara because for a guy that's been living for the past 40 years in Atlanta and working on projects a lot of them in the Southeast, you rarely get to work in a project where you can look out onto a sea where Jason and the Argonauts were reputed to have sailed. So when you're in a place like that, your heart just like beats in your chest, and you realize the responsibility that you have in the work. So this is the area that the project is sited on, and what it is a series of buildings. You can see some of the ships going out to the Sea of Marmara that were where the ships were built. You can see a period. Some photographs from the 1800s of ships sailing there. So this was about 600 years ago when it started. And they were still building ships there until recently. This is the site of the project. This is the Horn coming in, and then the Bosphorus going up to the Black Sea over there. And these are some of the buildings that were on the site. So we were charged to try to retain as many of the buildings as possible. So a few of us, Cassie Branham, you all might know her, David Green, we all went on the site. We all measured these buildings, we took pictures of them, we fell in love with them, and we started thinking about how we were going to reuse them in the project. So these are all historic buildings. And we started identifying how different areas could be organized around different sort of attitudes of shopping and living, and having to do with where the ships were built, where there could be marinas, things like that. We started mapping the buildings that were going to stay, and we started introducing new buildings and started setting them up by looking at the view corridors that would align with the major buildings that we thought really needed to be woven into part of this site. So this is the master plan that we came up with. And you can see that what we're trying to do is to connect back into the existing neighborhoods in order to bring the neighborhoods down to the water, and started thinking about the way that we could reconnect this site with the water and bring ships to the site. And we started cutting sections through the site and starting to locate where we would deal with the parking in a way that would not disrupt the experience of the site. And there are these fabulous cranes that were the cranes that were used to move the ships around all over the site. So we started thinking about those as important markers for the site development, and started thinking about painting those a consistent color and using those as organizing elements. And you can see them in red popping around. In the shipyard area, we started thinking about a place where we would put a museum, a nautical museum, and what we were doing there is taking an existing ship, cutting it in half, and then opening it up and using the inside of that ship as a museum. So these are all the different sections that we were looking at. These are existing buildings that we're repurposing, and then introducing new structures into them that would give sort of a new understanding of what the existing buildings were. You could see them, but then that they would revitalize them with new construction. This is the warehouse district, and this is an area where there's a mosque, there are offices, there are amphitheaters, and this is what that area would look like. And you can see the views from the site across the Golden Horns to the great mosques. This is an area that basically was going to be a lot of it was going to be hotels and residential areas, and this is the same kind of thing. You can see that the buildings are trying to work with sort of a scale that's similar to the scales that are found beyond. And then ultimately, this is the layout of the site as it looks with the Golden Horn joining the Sea of Marmara. On a very different note, this is the next site. This is the desert, right? So this is in the Middle East, and this is building a whole new university, and this is a health sciences university. So this is what the site looks like. But the site is on the Arabian Sea, or the Persian Gulf, as it's sometimes called. So there is this connection to the water, and there is sort of the acknowledgement, the more that I work over there, that there is this romance with the desert. A lot of my friends in the Middle East, when they go on vacation or they go hiking, they actually go to the desert. They like to go to the desert. which seems anathema to most of us that don't live in the desert. But camping in the desert is something that really is something that they're very close to. So they love the desert. So working with that idea of the desert, and also the traditional Arab idea that geometric shapes are really the proper expression, that it's not viewed as a positive thing to be representing organic forms. That's why you have the arabesques, because really the organic forms are something, and particularly human form, is something that only God should be able to represent. So it creates this sort of very rich ability to work with geometries, and then thinking about how those geometries can be interpreted and updated in a way that is consistent with the modern world. And then as I was thinking about the campus, we started thinking about what are forms within the campus that would make sense as desert forms. So the hospital, which is a huge hospital, it's about 2,000 beds, which is an enormous hospital. That's about the size of all of Piedmont Hospital, except all of that Piedmont Hospital area, but in one building. We started thinking about forming it almost like a scarab, or forming it in a circle, in a round form that would shield itself from the desert, that would deal with the winds of the desert, and be a very protective element. And we started working on ideas of how we could shield buildings with superstructures, because it gets to be about 120 degrees in the desert during the day. So all those things have to be thought about. And we started thinking about the way that the academic buildings, which are over in this part of the site, the research part of the building, and the hospital could all be melded together. One of the things that you have to realize, and you have to just put this behind you, is that in this part of the world, and in this country in particular, there's a separation of male and female. So, but this campus didn't want to do that, but they have to go in that way. So the way that we designed this was so that these things could be pulled together, so that once the campus is built, these wouldn't be spread apart, that they would be bridging together, and that these things coming together would bridge through a research component into the hospital. So that's basically the organization, and that in the center of it would be an oasis, and that oasis is the desert coming back through the site. So this is a diagram that we did to try to show how all these things go together. And this is a further development of it, that are showing the connections with these bridges that actually become the student centers that can be tied together, connecting back through the research building. And of course, the whole dealing with the severe climate is a very important aspect of it. So, we designed these buildings in a very careful way so that they would be self-shading, so that they would collect water, that they would properly cool the air. All this stuff needs to be done, but we didn't want to be about expressing that. It's just the way that the buildings need to work. So we did that all the way across the site. So here you see the organization of the project in the day, and then it has a very different character at night. We started laying out these buildings, and that they're very strong geometric expressions, and how they open up to create portals to connect to other parts of the campus. We started envisioning what the in-between areas would be like, thinking about areas where people could move through the roofs of the buildings, everything shaded, but providing views out. Here you see the academic buildings, and the way that we split this up was Pat was working on the academic buildings, and I was working on the research and hospital buildings, and then we'd shift over and I would work on those for a while, and she would work on this, and we just kind of went back and forth, and it was, typically you don't think that two design directors could get along, but it was after working with Pat for 30 years, it was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had, and we've become much better friends since then, because we were able to share in this work together. So you can see some of the work that she was doing here, the way that she was lifting the buildings off the site and letting the site slide underneath the buildings. And really reducing the amount of windows, but having those windows really focused out on key areas. The buildings that are shaped to shade themselves and to allow a lot of light so that you could look into the buildings, but the buildings wouldn't be receiving direct sunlight. So you can see this is the drop-off area for the academic buildings. And it's amazing that we're able to do this kind of thing in such a harsh climate, but it's all because of the shaping of the buildings. And then here you see the academic building, which is the research building, which is laid out in a very efficient manner, where you've got all the laboratories, you've got all the areas that service the laboratories. Everything is shielded in terms of the daylight, and you can see the way that the building soars over the desert and connects almost like a carpet underneath the academic areas. And then this is the portal that sits in the middle of that curved spine that connects back to the academic areas. And this is the spine that's within the building. A lot of time is spent indoors. So you can see that the arabesque, that shield wall that's on this side is allowing light to come in, but the idea is to have this very soft, sort of luminous, tranquil space where people can work and study. And then this is the hospital. So the hospital is also shielded, and the way that we designed the skin of the hospital is that, taking advantage of the curved shape, is we aimed it all so that it was always aimed north, so that as the curve goes around the building, it always maintains sort of a maximum opportunistic angle in terms of light. There's some areas that basically there's very little light coming in. So here you see it at night. So there's the rest of the city, and then beyond you see the Persian Gulf. And then finally, working here in Atlanta on the 14th Street Tower, very different sort of environment. This is always really interesting for me to see Atlanta from the air like this, because it's such an unpopulated city. That there's a city where there's this much vacant space, especially when you go around some of our major urban cities like New York or Boston or Chicago. Atlanta is pretty much unbuilt. And we had this amazing site, which is the site that's where the Symphony Hall was going to be, Calatrava's Symphony Hall, which sits between John Picard's 1180 and Philip Johnson's One Atlantic Center. So it's a really fantastic site. And so I was thinking about Atlanta, and what is Atlanta? It's like this hodgepodge of buildings, and every building is like its own private Idaho. It's like we got ziggurats, and we got bat wings, and we got we've got like 4 tops, we got 1 top, we got like Buck Rogers. It's a mess. It's like every building wants to scream out and get attention. There's no sense of continuity. That what you saw in Manhattan of those streets in Soho, there's none of that here. There's very little in the way of buildings that are clean and clear and confident and kind of look towards not being the center of attraction. So we started thinking about, well, what is a tower? It's a very different kind of thing. The program is basically was going to be like a 900 foot tower, which puts it in the super tall category. And those become sort of like vertical cities. And we started looking at where the site was going to be. And if you've ever walked on that site, it's kind of a mess, you know, because it's just left in scarred areas where you have like gardens that come up into loading areas. It's just, it's carved all the way through. You can't get from here to there without going down some stairs and going up some stairs or going around the sidewalk. You have beautiful sort of bucolic areas right up against parking structures. Of course, you have to pay to get in. You do have this one area because Philip Johnson carved out his area, and he just pretended he wasn't here and just did his own sort of like beautiful world. But here you see this is what you've got. These sort of holes in the site. There's one sort of beautiful area, which is at the 1180 building, where there's this beautiful walkway that goes nowhere at this point, which was set up to go, I believe, as a pedestrian access to Calatrava's Symphony Hall. So we want to take maximum advantage of that space. And then we started doing sort of a deep dive into Midtown and what Midtown was, but more importantly, what Midtown is. And it's amazing that 75% of people in Midtown basically are Gen X or millennials. And that there's this huge amount of students, right, that live in Midtown. There's a lot of people that come here during the day and a lot of people leave. And these are some of the things that we could find out were things that people were looking for in Midtown. It was obviously transit, looking for places that they could live where they could walk, places that are bike friendly, that bars, cultural activities, things like that. And we started thinking about what could this building be? You know, you're going to do this really tall building, and you don't want to put a party hat on it. So it could start being something that's about the fabric of the building itself. So in one of the ideas, started looking at shapes and started looking at things that were just beautiful objects. And I found this one, which is a Tiffany vase. And I just thought that this was just a beautiful idea. There is no bottom, there is no top, it's just pretty. So we started thinking about how we could do a skin on this building that would just present this beautiful graphic on the skyline. Then we also started thinking about another one that would be, what if you took this building and started folding it and started making, because it's a very tall building, that even the slightest fold would be able to make a beautiful shape, something that would be like a sculpture on the skyline of Atlanta. So we started thinking about it almost like an origami. And then we started thinking about a way that maybe the building itself could become like a series of blocks, of glass blocks that could become sort of like lanterns that stack up on the skyline. We took those three schemes and explored them in sketches. And I'm a big proponent of sketches. And if you look at my book sometime, you'll see that there's always sketches. And it's a fight that I have with a lot of the people that I work with, that as we start on projects, they immediately want to get into Revit and start drawing something in the computer when you don't even have any idea what you're going to draw. You know, so how can you start going to the computer that way? It's a generational thing, I know. But I think that it's really important to do these gestural drawings. So there was, you know, this vase idea, which was about this beautiful, elegant skin. There was the origami idea, which was about the folding of the tower. And then there was one that was about stacked blocks of light. And then we started modeling those. And we presented them to the owner as we were working through that. And they selected the first one. They liked the idea of the elegant minimalist tower. So that's the one that we proceeded with. And then here you see an elevation of the tower. So this is the 1180 building, and there's the Philip Johnson building. And then this is the tower that we're doing. So the first part of the tower includes parking, retail, restaurants, lobbies, a hotel, and then an amenity level. And then it shifts, and this becomes all condominiums. This is all residential from there on. So, you know, again, in the spirit of trying to do something that's clear and simple and understandable, we we just made one simple shift, and that was that on every side of the building, we would express the shift as a line, so that it goes from an area that's public in the sense that it's rental to an area that's owned in the sense of expressing the balconies. And we worked really hard to do something that is unusual in the world of condominiums, which is to gather the balconies on the corners. Instead of having this sort of random computer carved look of balconies just all over the place, they're all organized. And the idea was to have this very simple, clean, modern building. But in it, we had to work out all the programmatic areas, which I know you all know all about, which is with the hotels, figuring out where all the ballroom goes, all that stuff. Trash in, trash out, all that stuff. But you want to do it in a way that doesn't, like the sustainability features of the Middle East project, that doesn't call attention to that. It's just something that you really shouldn't have to pay attention to. That's not something that you want to highlight, I think. And then we started thinking about the top of the building. So rather than having the top of the building be something that looks like something, we wanted it to be something. So this idea that when you get up on the 72nd floor of the building, that you could start building your own sort of private world for those people that live up there and have these beautiful gardens that then are shielded by the glass planes that pass beyond the face, the last floors of the building, so that there's this other sort of world that's up here. So this is a view of the building where you see One Atlantic on that side, and you can see those balconies that I was referring to, and then it starts stepping back, and then this is the upper apartments, which are going to be penthouse apartments at the top of the building. So here's the building. I don't know if you all have seen this. It's been online, but so here's that expression. And what we did with the faces of the building is that we set it up so that they're always sort of zigging at different points, so that the shift is always expressed by the skin passing at different key elements around the building. You can see that clearly here as these parts sort of yin-yang, so you start presenting this sort of like vertical Catherine wheel as the tower goes up. But hopefully those are things that are kind of done so that when people look at this tower at a second or third time, they'll start seeing those parts of it. But they're not about hitting you over the head with it. It's about a very clean, classic, modern building that is going to stand in somewhat of opposition and presenting maybe a different gestalt of what Atlanta could be if Atlanta would stop trying to be something that it's not. If Atlanta wanted to actually join the real world and be a real city. And you could then have a building that's this clean and this confident and not have to worry about what people are going to think when they see it. And we started thinking about the ground plane next to it, and there's this idea of a retail building that is going to be part of the project. And it's going to activate this part of the street. And then there's going to be a second tower that rises up on behind this one. So here you see that building. This is kind of cool. We've had these renderings done by my new favorite renderers, who's a group in Sevilla. And they're wonderful. I mean, they really sort of capture an idea, an urban idea that actually doesn't exist in Atlanta. So we're hoping that this, by maybe circulating this kind of imagery, that we can actually influence in a way the way that the city thinks of itself. And then here you see the new building overlaid on the existing buildings, and that and then here you see it on the new skyline of Atlanta. So of course, I'm really into this, and I really like the idea of 35 years into my profession of doing a building that's this big and that could be this transformative to the city that I call home. Thank you. If there's any questions?
Yeah, let's do some Q&A. So anybody have any questions?
Yes.
I have a question. Manuel, I thank you so much for a terrific lecture, and I really appreciated and love the way at the very beginning how you just clearly and concisely stated what's at stake. And you can see how that affects the way that you approach each one of the projects relative to these different contexts, different scales, etc. So I really appreciate that, and for the students who are in the audience, I hope that they understand like that. That's really what it's about. It's like being able to be very clear about that. Also now for the students, and you made reference to this as you were presenting, you talked about the idea of the sketch,
Yes.
and starting with the sketch. And maybe it is a generational thing, I'm not sure, but I too start with a sketch. And I think the students also, there's a nervousness, I think, for many of them sketching because they feel they're not confident with their sketching skills. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about design process and how is it exactly that you go through the idea of sketching an idea that then leverages the way you start translating it into something else, the kind of iterative setting, and then ultimately to a resolution. I think that would be interesting for students to hear.
The thing that I think that is so wonderful about sketching is that your hand isn't always following what your brain is saying. So you're sketching and you're going in a certain direction. But then there's things that you see in the sketch that perhaps are things that maybe subconsciously you knew you were doing, but you didn't really consciously know. You were there, and all of a sudden you start following those lines. I know how to work somewhat on computers, but I know that you have to pretty much program in the idea, and then you can develop it, but not in the same sort of loose way. So when I was growing up, my father, in order to keep me out of trouble in Madrid, put me in a drawing academy. And in Madrid, in Spain, in order to get into architecture school, you have to pass a rigorous drawing exam. And it's not a drawing exam about architecture, it's a drawing exam where you'll go in and they'll say, we want you to draw a 17th century knight, right? And on his horse. So you have to know how to draw. And so there would be these people, and I was like 12, 13 years old, and I went every year, every summer, that were all learning how to draw and how to think about the world through their hand. And that's where I learned how to draw. And my professor at the time would like hit you in the hand if he saw you sort of nervously drawing. He would say, I don't care if it doesn't make sense, draw the lines. Draw the lines, with confidence. So that sort of built in this idea that creativity actually can come from your dreams and can come from your mind and channel through to your hand. And that then is where you begin. So when I start working on projects, I'm always sketching. And there's lots of different sketches that I do. And we work together as teams, and we put lots of our drawings up and start seeing in the drawings, they're almost like Rorschach tests of trying to find within those drawings the things that we can carry forward. One of my partners from many years ago, Norris Broyles, who also graduated from Georgia Tech, did a study of Gunnar Asplund, and he went to the library in Stockholm where they keep a lot of Gunnar Asplund's drawings. And this was again in the 70s, so this is before Gunnar Asplund had been rediscovered as a great architect. And he went into this room, and there was a little old man there, and he said, well, this is all of Gunnar Asplund's drawings, and this is all his books, and I'm going to lunch, so when you're through looking at them, just close the door behind you. So Norris was left in this room with all of these original Gunnar Asplund drawings. And of course, he said he had like the devil on one side and the angel on the other side. One saying take the drawings and the other one saying no, you can't take the drawings. But he didn't take the drawings, or so he says. But He said that there would be hundreds of drawings of the same thing, where each one was a slight variation of the other one. And that's what I'm saying is sort of the power of the sketch. That it's not something that you're going to get right away. It's not something that's going to, that the sky's not going to part. It's a patient, workmanlike process. And it begins there, and then in the process now that we use, we go from there, and then we start doing models. Models are very important. And then those models, then we start thinking about the structure and all the systems, and then we start putting it in Revit and start developing it there, but we're always going back and forth. So that's all I can say about that. I feel like Forrest Gump.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Anything else? Yeah.
Me? Even in your last answer, you're sort of putting a value on time, and I'm reflecting on the wisdom of your father and this kind of culture concept we're putting on the table. And certainly there are some millennia of difference between Istanbul and Atlanta in terms of the accumulation of time and material culture. And different kinds of, well, sort of differentials of speed of capital accumulation in various places, including the Middle Project in the Middle East. I'm sort of partial to this sort of Raymond Williams kind of definition of culture, that it's not a highbrow, lowbrow issue, but it's an entire way of life. And so could you speak more, working across continents in this way, what's your North Star relative to the culture concept?
That's a great question. My North Star is to try to be where I am. Like when you're flying across the ocean, you're flying across continents, the best advice is to always be on whatever time you're at and stop thinking about where you were. So when I'm in Istanbul, I think about Istanbul. So that's why these three projects look very different. I try to immerse myself, and it's not just me, it's Cassie and David and Jeff Williams and everybody else that I get to work with. We spend time in the city. We go to the restaurants, we go to the movie theaters, we hang out at bars. We try to understand who the people are and where the place is. And then we work with that to try to create, it's not saying, well, Istanbul is a much better place than Atlanta. It's not a better place, it's just a different place. And it has fabulous sort of characteristics, and we try to embody those in the work that we do. But I intentionally put Atlanta in here because I think that Atlanta gets a bad rap, and I give it a bad rap myself. But Atlanta is actually a very interesting city. And I remember when Rem came to Atlanta, I got to take him around because I knew who he was when he came to talk at Tech, and he was fascinated with the place. This is like in 1979. He 78. He thought the Masonic Temple over on Peachtree Street was the most fabulous thing he'd ever seen. He thought the Peachtree Plaza building was an amazing building. And at the time, I remember, because I was a young architect, and I was thinking, really? Why is that so great? But after a while, I started seeing that what he was seeing was sort of the values, the cultural values, the energy of this particular city expressed in those buildings that make them kind of a unique place. The same thing with the desert. I mean, we do the same thing. I mean, I got to know people that love the desert and what the desert would be like, and we started finding out about buildings that could live well in the desert, that people would feel comfortable in, and that started generating the idea. So it is about culture, it is about place, and a lot of it is also about who you are as a person. So I don't know any other way to do it than that. I always find it really funny, and it's a good marketing technique if you develop a style. I mean, if you hire Richard Meyer, you know what you're going to get, right? And it's good, it's good stuff, but you're going to get a white building with some square bricks. And he'll do that here, and he'll do that in Barcelona, and he'll do that in Amsterdam. He'll do it everywhere. It's an easy thing to do. It's good marketing because the clients know what they're going to get, right? So they're not surprised. With us, they're not really quite that sure what they're going to get. They know that they're going to get sort of a thoughtful process. That's not what we sell. What we sell is an interdisciplinary that we're working with architects, with landscape architects, with urban designers. We're working with people that focus on brand and messaging, with graphic designers, and that we're able to bring this all together to create unique solutions. So I like that approach. I think that approach creates more interesting places.
Yeah, so going back to the sketching, do you really think it's a generational idea that we always use computer, or is more like a permutation based on the technology that we have available right now?
I think that the desire to draw is generational. But I know that there's people that I work with that use the computer the same way that I use a pencil. So that is what makes it generational. I can't help it when I work with the computer, work with it in kind of an inadequate way. All I see are limits to what I can do. Where the people that are like maybe 20, 30 years younger than me, that are extremely facile and are great designers, work with it in a very successful way. I still feel that there's a beauty to a hand-done drawing that I just don't see in computer drawings. What you were saying, that some people feel nervous because they don't feel like they draw very well. Well, if you look at some drawings of great architects like even Le Corbusier, some of his hand drawings, some people would say are not particularly nice drawings. I love them. I think they're great, but they're not classically beautiful drawings. But his drawings are expressive, and they're confident, and they're about shape and form and beauty, and that's what I think that you can get in a hand drawing that's more difficult. What I think is funny is when we do computer drawings and then try to make them look like hand drawings. You know what I'm talking about, right? You do a computer drawing, you lay it all out, and then you start putting screens on it to make it look like watercolor, or make the lines look squiggly. That seems kind of weird to me. I mean, if you're going to do a computer drawing, do a computer drawing. But it's hard to fall in love with a computer drawing, whereas you can fall in love with a sketch.
And do you care about the medium that you use for sketching?
No, I think all mediums are good. That's like asking, do you care what book you read? It doesn't really matter whether you're reading, Flash Gordon or you're reading Flaubert. The fact that the only thing that's important is that you're reading.
Because I was thinking more on Stephen Hall and how he does certain mediums to express.
Yeah. I mean, I like working back and forth with drawings in the computer. And now we're starting to work with, like everybody else is, with sort of holographic projections and all sorts of different technologies. But I still like the drawing, And what I know is that when I can sit in front of a client in Beijing, where we're not even speaking the same language, and I can sketch what the client wants or is thinking about, that there's a magic that happens in that sketch, in that moment with the client, that is difficult to reproduce with a computer. I'm not against computers. I love computers. I just think that we should be drawing just as much. I actually think we should be drawing more. I don't know do you guys have drawing? Do you guys do drawing? Is drawing taught here anymore?
It is. Yeah.
It's back.
So it's just super important. I think that it's a very important thing, and I know that I sound like an old fogey saying that. I think it's super important. Yeah.
So back to the first two projects that you mentioned. How does Perkins+Will deal with like an overseas client, in terms of a different time zone and like a different culture, as what we mentioned, or like a different codes and regulations, all that kind of stuff? Does Perkins+Will have a like a local branch that you can co-work with, or do you have to work with like a local firm to address other
We do
issues?
both. I mean, we have like in China, we have offices in China. We have office in Dubai. We have office in London. We have office in, we have a sister office in Paris. So when we're working in those cities, whether in Europe or we're in Sao Paulo in Brazil, but when we're working in other places, like in the Middle East or in Istanbul, we don't have an office. Then we work with an associate architect. And that's somebody that we can work with that works on a similar platform to us. We work together on the projects, and that's just one more part of the team. But actually, that's a wonderful thing because they often can influence us in ways that we would never know. When we're working in China, it is, still when you're working in Istanbul, it's still, it's still Europe. So it's even the Middle East is still recognizable culture. When I went to China, and I speak several languages, but I went to China for the first time, I was like, oh my God, I don't understand anything that is being said. I can usually pick up something. And then I found out that it wasn't just language. I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand about the colors. I didn't understand about the numbers. I didn't understand about the interaction. And all the people that we work with would tell us, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to respond to that. Don't use this number of floors, stack it a different way. All those things are not coming to us from clients, they're coming from our collaborators in those cities. So it's a really important thing. And one of the strategies that Perkins+Will has in terms of having a lot of offices is not to have a lot of offices. It's to have people in those offices that understand those climates. So I'm giving you extremes of Atlanta and Beijing, but we also have an office in Miami, and we have an office in Vancouver. So the people that are in the Miami office are completely different from the people that are in the Miami and in the Vancouver office. The reason why we're in Vancouver is because we want to work in that environment. So those architects, those designers that are there are people from that part of the world, from British Columbia. And the people that are in the Miami office are Miami people. There tend to be a mix of Cuban and South American and people from Miami. So it's important that you be of the place that you are. So that's why we have a lot of different offices. The Sao Paulo office is my favorite office. In Sao Paulo, have you guys ever been to have any of you ever been down there? It's the biggest city I've ever seen. There's this hotel that's called the Hotel Unique, which is shaped like a wedge of a watermelon. It's shaped like this, and it's got a flat roof. So of course, being a hotel, it has to have a roof deck. So we went up to the roof deck, and I was standing on the roof deck, and I saw in front of me a skyline, and the skyline looked a lot like the skyline of New York. But then I started rotating around, and it went all the way around me. So it's the biggest place I've ever seen. And the traffic is so bad that all the skyscrapers, all the buildings that you see, a lot of them have helipads, so that people move around on helicopters through the city. I mean, this is like Hugh Ferris was drawing in the 20s and 30s, except it exists there. And one of the great things about, and now it sounds like I'm trying to recruit, but one of the great things about working at Perkins+Will or an office like that is that you get to work in all these places. And it's a very enriching and you feel very fortunate that you get to work in places like Istanbul, and you get to work in places like Africa, Asia, South America. And those are your friends, right? Those are your collaborators that you end up working with. So you never know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Speaking of environment, have you faced, what are some of the serious challenges you faced creating a building in the middle of the desert?
Well, I mean, the heat, right? I mean, that's obviously it. And the fact that we insist
In the Middle East too.
Yeah, that we insist on having as open and spaces as possible. That we insist on having views. That a lot of the buildings that we work in, particularly those buildings, are buildings where doctors and caregivers and professors and researchers are there for 24 hours a day working in those buildings, and it's really important that they know what time of day it is. So it adds an added challenge that when you're working in a place that basically doesn't want windows, that you can design buildings like the one that Pat was doing, the buildings that are shaped beautifully like this, that then have the building, that the glass sort of shielded and can be completely clear. So there's a lot of different strategies, and we have teams that start looking at the skins of the buildings, the shapes of the buildings, that we can start working with to address those things. In Atlanta, it's different. You know, what we're working with in a building like this, it has to be with the way that the glass itself is designed, the glass skins, because the tenants don't really want to have, they want to be able to have the views. But this isn't as severe a climate as the Middle East or as the desert. Anything
Any more
else?
questions?
Well, thanks a lot for coming. I appreciate it.